Welcome to the European Parliamentary Research Service podcast on the state of EU-Russia relations.
Following the post-Cold War reset, EU-Russia relations have been strained, not least by Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea, to which the EU responded with hard-hitting sanctions.
Putin's support for rebel groups in eastern Ukraine, his policies in the neighbourhood, disinformation campaigns, and Russia's intervention in Syria just added fuel to the fire, and yet the two remain closely interdependent. So how to deal with Putin's Russia? Stay with us.
Since relations between the EU and Russia were established in the 1990s, the two sides have described each other as strategic partners, but have eyed each other with increasing distrust, and tension keeps mounting.
Initially seen as a pro-Western reformer, Vladimir Putin's authoritarian tendencies soon became clear, disappointing those who hoped Russia would develop into a liberal democracy, and post-Soviet Eastern Europe became a major arena for confrontation.
The 2006 Russia-Ukraine energy crisis and Russia's 2008 war in Georgia were the first setbacks, but where relations really broke down was after Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its support for separatist groups in the regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, where fighting has caused over 13,000 deaths and displaced millions.
The EU is quick to adopt sanctions, to which Russia retaliated with counter-sanctions, and it's in this climate that the EU shaped the principles of its new policy with Russia. So what are these principles?
First of all, insisting on the full implementation of the Minsk agreements on eastern Ukraine as a precondition for lifting sanctions. Second, strengthening relations with Russia's former Soviet neighbours. Third, increasing the EU's resilience to Russian threats such as energy security, disinformation or cyber threats. Fourth, selective engagement with Russia on issues of common interest such as counter-terrorism or climate change. And finally, supporting Russian civil society and promoting contacts between Russian and European citizens in order to build trust. Now let's have a closer look at all of these points.
Let's start with the Minsk agreements. Respect for these agreements, which was signed by both parties in an effort to end the fighting in eastern Ukraine, is a condition for the EU to lift its economic sanctions, but so far Russia has not complied with any of the agreement's main points and continues to finance and arm rebel groups in the area.
The EU and US sanctions combined have caused the Russian economy to shrink by 6%. But Russia's counter-sanctions, banning around half of its agri-food imports from the EU, have also hit the European economy, albeit not as hard. And despite some calls to ease the sanctions, EU leaders remain united on this.
EU leaders are also clear about another point. Russia's aggression against the Ukraine won't deter the EU from pursuing closer relations with the former Soviet Union countries, which are often torn between the two blocs. The EU's closest allies in the region are Ukraine and Georgia. Moldova, although it has an association agreement with the EU, is led by a pro-Russian minority government which could stall progress with the EU.
As for Belarus, relations suffered a heavy blow after the last presidential election in August this year, an election the EU believes did not respect the international standards of fairness and transparency, and the results of which, therefore, does not recognise.
Security, stability, democracy and the rule of law in Eastern Europe and the Southern Caucasus are a major priority for the EU. But so is improving the EU's resilience to Russian threats, be they of a military or, as increasingly the case, hybrid nature, such as cyber attacks or disinformation campaigns to discredit Western values and cause further division on sensitive issues such as migration or Islamic terrorism.
Russia's troll army may also have proved very effective in spreading pro-Kremlin propaganda, creating fake social media profiles and writing blog posts to discredit the EU and turn Russians against Europe. But they do worse than that. They also attempt to interfere with the results of political elections, as seen with the last US presidential election, the UK's Brexit referendum, and Catalonia's independence vote in 2017.
To counter this threat, the EU has set up a task force that identifies and debunks Russian disinformation attempts and is working with social media platforms to keep the internet safe and transparent.
The EU's dependence on Russian oil and gas, most of which arrives in Europe via pipelines crossing the Ukraine, is another weak point for the EU, especially in the light of the current geopolitical tensions. The EU has consequently taken the first steps to become more energy independent, for example, by building more infrastructure to allow member states to share gas.
But the controversy over Nord Stream 2, the pipeline which would bring Russian gas directly into Germany, reminds everyone who calls the shots on energy matters.
There are certainly many reasons why Europe should not trust Vladimir Putin's Russia, but there are also many reasons to seek further cooperation. There are areas where the two sides have common interests and concerns.
Whether we like it or not, Russia is an important global player. As a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council and an increasingly influential player in the Middle East and Africa, Russia has a key role to play in helping tackle global challenges, from counterterrorism to climate change and international stability.
The EU is also aware of the need to strengthen ties between the Russian people and Europeans. And although it cut off most of its cooperation with Russia following the Ukrainian crisis, it continues to engage in the fields of higher education, scientific research, cross-border cooperation and support for civil society.
So, how are relations with Russia likely to evolve in the coming years? Stay with us.
Well, after 6 years of deadlock, French President Emmanuel Macron is among those calling for renewed EU-Russia dialogue, but calls for re-engagement come from both sides.
Despite Russia's efforts to reorient economic cooperation towards Asia, Europe is still by far Moscow's biggest trade and investment partner. And now, with the coronavirus crisis squeezing an economy already decimated by the sanctions, Russia also has good reason to seek a new beginning.
Improved relations between the Ukraine and Russia following the election of President Zelensky in spring 2019 raised hopes of a solution to the Donbass conflict, which remains the biggest obstacle to better relations between both sides. However, there is still no sign of a breakthrough.
And in the absence of significant progress in Ukraine, EU leaders agreed just before the summer to prolong economic sanctions for another 6 months, a decision which Russia obviously deplored.
But with no signs of meaningful concessions from Moscow, we can only conclude that the 6-year deadlock between the two sides looks set to continue.
You're listening to the European Parliamentary Research Service podcasts.